First, I would like to thank you, Ms. Director General and UNESCO for welcoming us, and special thanks, we should all do that, to CISAC, Gadi and his beautiful team. Special thanks to Jean-Noël and the SACEM team who had an original idea a few years back for letting EY be part of this incredible adventure. Looking at a whole economy that is never called an economy, looking at 11 sectors, I will tell you more about it in a minute, worldwide, and trying to turn numbers into stories, into life stories, into music, into art. It's foolish but fascinating, and we were happy to be part of it. I will tell you in the next few minutes about the highlights and some surprises in this study. You need to turn on the screen. We're in one of the best rooms of UNESCO, and the screen is there, so you have to look at the screen, not at me, and for a minute, not at Ms. Director General and Jean-Michel. Overall, to estimate the 11 sectors which you see on the screen, the UI team had to extricate, extrapolate, verify, analyze enormous amounts of data, you can imagine that, and facts in all countries, the 120 countries of CISAC. So I'd like to thank also artists, managers, business executives, professional organizations, media experts who gave us time in all these countries, in Europe, Asia Pacific, North America, Latin America, and Africa, the 5 regions that we will focus on in a minute. We know that this project can grow and can improve, but we're already very proud of it. So I'll give you highlights about the weight of the cultural and creative industries, its markets, where it happens, the digital dimension, of course, must be, the story must be told here as well, and the diversity of its people and locations. But first, I'd like to confirm what Jean-Michel said in a few minutes ago, is that it's an economy, and it's a massive one. The 11 sectors generate, as you can see, total revenues of $2,250 billion, numbers that, are hard to grasp unless you see that it is more than the car industry, but 50% more than telecom services, for instance, which is already very striking in itself. It's a live economy as well, employing nearly 30 million people. It's 1% of the world's active population. So once you start getting in the percentage points in the world's active population, you start talking about mass and quantity, and of course, a lot of quality. You all know that. But what I want to stress is that it's dispersed in more than 1,000 job categories in creation, production, distribution of creative and cultural content. So it's not only about artists. Of course, artists and creators are the core, but there is a number of trades and jobs and employment, technical, sales, distribution, production that gather and disseminate around. And this forms the 30 million army of cultural and creative economies. As you can see on the right, and you'll have more on this in the study that you can all pick up live here and on the internet at, I guess it's Creative World or World Creative. Is it Creative World or World Creative? Worldcreative.org, okay? So you can, if you're thirsty about more numbers, you'll have all of them on the internet, but half of the revenues are produced in TV, no surprise about it, but also in visual arts, which is a mix of museums, photography, design, painting, and the press, which is around the world, is the number 3 sector in terms of revenue. Far different is the analysis of the largest employers. Although you find visual arts, you find there music, which is the number 2 in terms of jobs created directly and indirectly by this economy, and the book industry, which comes 3rd. The rest, again, is very much in the detailed story and detailed study that you can find after this conference. Let me turn to one of the surprises to our study, which Jean-Michel alluded to a little bit. The Asia Pacific. The Asia Pacific is the world's largest market for the culture and creative economy, 1/3 of all revenues and about 40% of jobs. It's fueled by the largest demographics, of course, but also a middle class, a rising middle class, a massive middle class that is hungry for modern consumption and technology and news. Asia, so the number one market, is followed by Europe and North America, number 2 and number 3, which are places of economic power and heritage and trend settings, and also well-structured ecosystems with different mixes of public support here and there. But all in all, the number 2 and number 3 markets where the cultural and creative economies already represent more than 4% of the GDP. Worldwide, it's about 3%, but in those two mature economies, mature regions, I should say, it's more than 4% already and growing. But we can't ignore the immense opportunities south and growth in potential in Latin America and Africa, where already the music and movie industry, for instance, are economies by themselves and well-structured, and the enormous aspiration of the population, which holds great promises for the next decade, maybe sooner, driven by new form of cultural experiences and mobile devices. So there's a lot to say, more than what I can in a few seconds, about this enormous potential south, which is striking and maybe the basis for the next studies to come. In the digital revolution, so we go from the scope, from the larger scope to smaller topics, I mean large topics, but more specific topics that I wanted to address this morning. In the digital revolution, I'll be helped by 4 Ds, which help illustrate the interactions between the creative economy and the digital economy. First, D for diversity. What we've seen in our interviews, in our gatherings of data and facts, is instead of leading to a standardization of cultural contents, the digital revolution, we have to say that first, has made available a broad range of cultural goods, books, songs, movies, etc., usually difficult to access with brick and mortar distribution channels, for instance, in emerging countries. And as an illustration, the digital platforms already provide access to 15 million music titles and more than 30 million book titles. I will not escape the debate about the compensation of rights and creation, but we have to see the access and the diversity of the access and the channels all the time, everywhere, for everyone. D is also for disruption, and of course there is this massive disruption, the very challenging shift for some businesses and creators in revenue streams, with competition born from the competition with digital giants, internet giants, e-commerce giants. You all know who I'm talking about, who are putting the historic sources of income at risk in the music, in the press, in the movie industry. Some industries are getting back to a more balanced revenue stream, but all are fragile and vulnerable, and we have to take care of that. On the other hand, what we've seen is that the competition also creates new revenue models for distribution staff, for artists, through apps and streaming, for instance. What we've seen and what I wanted to point this morning is also some reverse disruption, because brick and mortar is back. And to provide a continuum of experience, what we've seen is that, for instance, bookstores reopening almost everywhere in the world, in New York, in Paris, and even Amazon has decided to reopen bookstores in North America. D is for devices, because we've looked at that as well, and cultural content has a direct impact on the sale of smartphones and tablets, a very direct impact, so that has to be stressed in your debates in places where that business, that industry is key. It's an additional $500 billion directly derived from the sale and the media from which you can see and hear and experience cultural and creativity. And finally, D as in advertising. I'm sorry, I couldn't find better, because it's one of our 11 sectors, and creativity is at the core of the ad trade. We can all debate that later on with a drink, but it's very much a part of the creative world, and revenues for online media, revenues from digital design, from streaming websites are a very prevalent and very growing source of revenues in the cultural and creative. It's all a matter of how you capture, control, and find the right compensation, of course. I'd like to illustrate another stop in our incredible trip. It's a one-year trip, so I can tell you it's not It's not interstellar, but it's something to experience among people in the creative and cultural economies, because as you put it very well, Ms. Director General and Jean-Michel, this is about people. We have a few very interesting angles, which I let you discover. Youth, because creative activities and careers are more open than any career in the world to people of all ages and background. This is a fact. This is numbers, statistics. Already in Europe, it employs more people under 30 than any other sector. Inclusiveness, because compared with traditional industries, creative industries tend to employ more women. For instance, the UK statistics show that women account for more than 50% of jobs in all those in the music industry, for instance, versus 47% in the active population. So there is also a driver of change in that element. I wanted to stress entrepreneurship. You will find all this with your bedtime reading in the study, but entrepreneurship to us is a very, very important and very key factor in that voyage. Creation is driven by small businesses and mostly by individuals. The need to innovate, giving rise now to more agile employers, small and very small businesses. More than half of Canadian gaming developers, for instance, say they are independent operators. And in the US, artists are 3.5 times more likely to be self-employed than US workers overall. So there is this element also that is a driver of growth and the overall economy. And finally, we had to step into the observation of the informal economy, which is an economy. Of course, it provides unofficial art and in private events, in street performances, in concerts which do not pay authors' right most of the time, but also are free for audiences who cannot afford it. So the debate will be open after I've shut up. Overall, what I want to stress, it is estimated to provide 1.2 million jobs worldwide, and this cannot be ignored because it's a big chunk of employment in places where employment is rare. I want to continue and almost finish with a look at where creativity and culture happens, locally, physically, in reality, in cities. Why? Because developing cultural infrastructure, museums and concert halls and schools is key for emerging countries. We've seen that in our study. We tell a little bit of these stories in the book that you can find, but also because it creates adjacent economies like tourism. These emerging countries will attract more than half of international tourism by 2030, and so developing those infrastructure is key in cities and countries which want to be part of the developing and the developed world, and already for some of them very much part of the developed world in terms of the economic growth. Because also Asia counts for more than 500 million middle-class cultural consumers. So we've counted 500 million population who have access and regularly consume cultural content. I know that consume and cultural is an oxymoron, but this is what we've observed, and this is EY, so I'm entitled to this type of oxymorons. You'll forgive me for that, Jean-Michel. And these middle-class consumers 80% of them are in cities. So cities are very key to the creativity and to the growth of that economy. Also because the creative class, authored by Richard Florida, I encourage you to read them, because he said a lot about the key engine of growth, innovation, and attractiveness through culture and creativity in urban areas. And also, and finally, because art has helped dynamize cities everywhere, and we have the Guggenheim Bilbao example, of course, who's helped create more than 1,000 jobs and multiplied the attractiveness of a very depressed Basque country over a decade very, very rapidly. I've presented, and I realize that, but times are a bit gloomy everywhere, and especially in this city, so I wanted to present a positive, I hope constructive, and realistic view of an economy that is already and also very fragile, and is the root and the basis of the digital revolution, because without content, we've had numerous testimonials about that. the dream to digitally reach, link, and sell to vastly untapped markets will not happen. We've had testimonials of this from very large businesses, from internet businesses also, and I know they have another posture and behavior in the debates about authors' rights and compensation, but they have been very public about the fact that without creativity and culture, their business will not happen. You have to insist on that. They raise 4 issues, these interviews that we've had across the world. First, we've had many examples of the continuing growth of that economy. Of course, in the 11 sectors, you'll find ups and downs and crises and bumps and very happy times in some parts of these economies. But we have seen the hunt for growth and scale and global expansion in what used to be a very fragmented world and is no more a fragmented world. I can testify, for instance, from other EY studies that 50% of companies expect to pursue acquisition in the next 12 months, especially in the media and entertainment business. So we'll see more of that global expansion happening. Another challenge that I wanted to stress is the capacity, of course, to persuade consumers to pay for something that have been for most of them or for some of them accessing for free, and for the economy to extract a fair share of the value generated by cultural content. Talent is one of the challenges and one of the very nice adventures of this economy, because it's the lifeblood of the creative industries, for instance, in the creative class, as I mentioned earlier, and very key to the buildup of creative hubs and cities everywhere. And finally, of course, if we want authors and creators to continue creating and authoring, they must be compensated fairly. This has been said to us all the time. We've heard it across continents, across sectors, and we've heard about the failure to properly reward creators. In the EY perspective, this is bad because this is limiting revenues and holding back growth and ability to generate jobs. So what I'm hoping is that for the second edition of the study, I will be happy, or someone else at EY will be happy to report on a better balance and a better growth and value everywhere for everyone. Thank you very much.